While the swarm descends on Earth, Optimus is surprisingly rescued by Starscream, seeming to still be suffering a bit of the effects of the Matrix on his ethics. Optimus briefly touched the mind of the swarm and realizes that it's basically a blank slate. No morality, no direction. It's lashing out because it doesn't understand how to do anything else. Optimus heads out to the swarm in order to be consumed. And it seems like every time Prime dies, they just want to make it more and more gruesome. Yeesh. Point is, he does so while trying to remain as calm and sane as he can, becoming part of the swarm and, well, transforming it, distilling his sense of honor, resolve, responsibility, and nobility thanks to him still possessing the Matrix. And Optimus emerges from the swarm, reconstituted. They can create matter from what they consumed, and the swarm is sent off to be a force for life in the universe instead of destruction. Optimus makes a speech about how, as the only remaining Transformers in creation, they must use this as a second chance for something better for their people. And meanwhile, Megatron is off somewhere going, well, wonder if Cobra's hiring. However, it's revealed on the final page that plenty of the Generation 2 Transformers still exist, led by the Lege Maximo. It reveals that Megatron is one of its descendants, just as Optimus Prime is a descendant of the original Primes that first held the Matrix, and that the day of reckoning will come. No it won't. Despite the sequel tease, this was the end of Generation 2 stuff, though characters like G-Axis did get adopted into future stories and continuities. Like I said earlier, Generation 2 sucks, though it does improve near the end. The artwork getting slightly better as it goes on also helps, but only slightly. It's still a dreary read, and while it's good that we got a book that's pretty solidly focused on a smaller group of characters, what they say and do is kind of repetitive and derivative of stuff we've already had. Starscream being treacherous and achieving ultimate power, Decepticons and Autobots needing to join forces against a common foe, using the Matrix to undo damage, etc. And for a book whose conclusion is about rejecting violence, it is a very violent book. Lots of Transformers die, but we don't even have a lot of past one-off stories to care. And hell, San Francisco gets completely leveled, while several cities were said to be in flames from Bludgeon's attack, so there's an untold amount of human casualties too. This ending kinda reminds me of the end of Maximum Carnage, where Spider-Man fired a gun that shot feel-good rays to stop a wave of murderous insanity throughout people. Though as imperfect and kinda goofy as that was, I've always liked Maximum Carnage, and especially comparing it to this story, it's definitely more focused on trying to find the better parts of ourselves and stopping violence. Grimlock gets the most development though, carrying on from where he was before, and I actually quite appreciated that. There are certainly ideas here that could be explored, but the mid-90s were definitely not where they were going to be fully realized. I should note that there was technically a follow-up to this in a novella Simon Furman made and released at 2 UK conventions, but it's essentially fan fiction, so we won't get into it here. Instead, we've got another follow-up to the original continuity, Regeneration One. What I could not find was a reason why it was happening at all. It's not like 2012 was an anniversary year or something for it, but if I had to guess, probably the great sales on the IDW trades of the Marvel series. It got 2 major printings, with the second printing apparently settling all the rights issues with Marvel for their characters in it, so they wouldn't have to leave something out like they did the first time through. Simon Furman returns, but also Andrew Wildman on pencils, who had been the primary artist for a good chunk of the original book, and subsequently was responsible for giving us the nightmare that was Ratchetron. Oop, got another one. We've seen how Michael Bay makes a Transformers movie, now let's see how David Cronenberg makes one. We start things off with issue number 80.5, a free comic book day release that mostly serves as a recap of the Marvel series and setting the stage for Regeneration One. 21 years after the end of number 80, the last Autobot now spends his days as a statue. The pay is good, but getting pooped on all the time by Laserbeak is annoying. A band of dissident ex-Decepticons, led by Soundwave, take control of the Orbital Defense Network and fire directly on the last Autobot, destroying him. Damn, and he was only 3 million years away from retirement! And issue 81 starts us off proper with several storylines. Since this was 2012, pacing of the book matches what you'd find in modern comics as opposed to the 80s and 90s. Multi-parters instead of done-in-ones, beginning with loose ends. Prime has become more and more distant from the rest of the Autobots, spending time either alone or mentoring Hot Rod. Unfortunately, that separation seems to be keeping him from seeing the true depth of the growing Neo-Decepticon movement that Soundwave is leading, acts of terrorism that they've been perpetrating. Optimus doesn't want to come down hard on them out of fear of fully reigniting the war. Meanwhile, Soundwave is contacted by Bludgeon, who says he's finally ready to rejoin the Decepticon cause with a sizable military force, but he needs Soundwave to find something for him. Disgusted by Prime's lack of action, Kup decides, after all this time, to take action, leading an Autobot strike team called the Wreckers, a recurring and popular group in a lot of continuities who got their start in the Marvel UK stuff, to go to every planet touched by the Great War and destroy every trace of Decepticons out there. First stop, Earth, which, much to the shock of our heroes, has been utterly devastated. Climate change, people! This was always the end result of the Autobots and Decepticons being gas guzzlers. They can tell that Earth has been like this for a while. Evidently nobody bothered to check in on Earth in 20 years after they dropped off the Neonites, and their probes soon discover the cause, sitting on a makeshift throne in the middle of Washington, D.C. Megatron. Thank Primus! I've been so bored I've rebuilt and destroyed Starscream 3 times now! He launches missiles and seemingly destroys their shuttle, leading us into issue 82. Our heroes manage to avert death in escape pods, and we see that Megatron now has an army of half-destroyed, lobotomized troops, including Ratbat, shockingly enough. I guess his corpse could have been on the Ark after Scorponok blasted him, just unexpected is all. Oh, and yes, he did indeed rebuild Starscream, lobotomized like the others, but he says he kept a tinge of self-awareness as a form of torture for him. This special torment I reserve for all who oppose or defy me. Isn't that so, Ratchet? Jesus Christ! Yeah, Ratchet's head is mounted on the front of his little hover scooter, and he's apparently still alive. Still, gotta imagine it's better than being fused with Megatron, so upgrade? Who knew Brother Eye was a Transformers fan? Issue 81 had mentioned this, but here's where we get properly caught up with Grimlock. Something that Furman had wanted to explore in the original Marvel run before it got cut short was that the nucleon used to revive the Dinobots wasn't going to react the same way for all of them. For Grimlock, he lost the ability to transform. Others got it worse. As such, he's on his way to Nebulos to see if they can fix the problems they all have. In the intervening time, Nebulos and Cybertron actually made a full-on peace and trade treaty. It seems that they still had the heads of those Autobots from the original Headmasters miniseries, Fortress Maximus included, and part of the treaty was to try to restore the heads to their bodies, since some of the Nebulan Headmasters were killed by Unicron. Unfortunately, Nebulos has seen better days too, as Grimlock is blasted and knocked out upon arrival. Kup gets captured by Megatron while the Wreckers try to get to an intact communication satellite to call for help, though Megatron admits he wants Optimus Prime to finally come here. They also find some humans who naturally run off upon seeing the Transformers, but they are protected by Spike Witwicky, now flying around with cybernetic enhancements and calling himself Circuit Smasher. Oh hey, they're in the DC universe now! They have legacy heroes! This leads to issue 83. After Spike's human companions convince him not to fry the Autobots, we learn what happened. Spike kept people away from the Ark for a couple years, but he couldn't stand being Fortress Maximus full-time. As such, eventually a group in 1994 got into the Ark and seemingly reactivated Megatron. He went berserk and just started blasting humanity on his own. When they tried to nuke him, he somehow had an invasive program that sent the missiles right back at the bases that launched them. He then brought about the lobotomized troops, referred to as X-Bots. Fort Max and a detailless and unnamed circuit breaker joined the fight, but by then it was too late. They arrive back at a military base and meet the leader of this ragtag force, a now wheelchair-using GB Blackrock. I've got just one question, Autobots. Where's Optimus Prime? He owes me $50! Earth is in ruins and there's no global economy or reason for money. I know that, but in case you hadn't noticed, with the Earth destroyed, I don't have much else going on. Optimus, after having admitted to Hot Rod that his rebirth kinda caused his stagnation, he was at peace after dying, only to be dragged out of the Matrix into the new body with Haikyuu, gets informed of Kup's departure and a weak distress signal reveals Megatron's presence on Earth. Where are you, Prime? Don't you want to see what I've done to your precious planet? That's supposed to be menacing, but it turns out he means he just put in lawn gnomes. We learn that Fort Max was killed and Spike along with him. Or rather, it was more like his brain shut down while his body remained alive. His nervous system also shot. Using the techniques that turned Josie into Circuit Breaker, combined with the Nebula implants Spike had, they were able to turn him into Circuit Smasher. The problem they're finding in countering Megatron is the Ark. It was already an advanced piece of equipment in its day, but Megatron has been enhancing it, and even found ways to counter and resist the powers that Circuit Smasher has. He then sends a message out to the Autobots, showing them Cup infected with scraplets. It's clearly a trap, but they think this might be their opportunity to attack the Ark while Megatron's distracted. Optimus and his forces depart for Earth, leaving Hot Rod in command. With most of Cybertron's best warriors embarking on the mission, Soundwave is told by Bludgeon, who, in a nod to Generation 2, is flying around in the Warworld ship, to go on his mission. Obtain the remains of Thunderwing. At this rate, it's going to turn out Zarek and Scorponok have been secretly alive this whole time. Hell, let's bring in Decepticon leaders from the cartoon next. Astro Train tried to take over the Decepticons with an army of trains once. Let's do that again. Anyway, issue 84. I was kidding! I mean, especially since this is an alternate cover to issue 83. Issue 84 is pretty much all action. Half the Wreckers, along with the humans, stage their assault on the Ark and get to the outer doors, while the other Wreckers try to retrieve Cup. They're unsuccessful, though Optimus and his forces arrive. In addition, Starscream manages to fight off the inhibitors in his brain just enough to whisper to Cup, "Kill Ratchet!" And with issue 85, we wrap things up. Megatron plans to use the Ark to launch missiles all over the planet to wipe out all remaining life, and the Cybertronians themselves, regardless of his victory or defeat. He just wants a chance to finally kill Optimus. Fortunately, Cup got the message and understood it. As we saw at the end of the series, Megatron and Ratchet's minds were still linked. Harming one harms the other. Megatron was able to use Ratchet's mind to resurrect his Decepticons, but Ratchet needed to stay alive for Megatron to stay alive. Then I probably wouldn't have put his head on the thing I'd be riding into battle. Call me overly cautious, but one good pothole and you're dead, Megs. Spike is able to enter the Ark and disable its computer, eliminating the missiles as a threat as well. With Cup killing Ratchet, Megatron and his forces fall. Meanwhile, Soundwave begins his assault on the facility housing Thunderwing's body. Well, it's revealed that indeed, Scorponok is alive on Nebulos, offering Grimlock a new body if he joins him. Just watch, people! Who's next that's gonna enter the picture? The Mechanic? The Mechanibles? The Femax Queen? Bring them all back! Form the Legion of Doom or something! Hell, we technically never did get resolution on the Mechanic. He just escaped. Oh, and lest we forget yet another villain, during all this, Galvatron rises out of the ice that Fort Max put him in. Issue 86 begins the next storyline, Natural Selection, with a flashback revealing, the Nucleon's effects on the Transformers has been a thing for at least 5 years now. Slag of the Dinobots is bestial, Blaster is in what looks like a padded cell, Inferno is apparently constantly on fire, and then there's poor Hound down there wrapped in shrink wrap. In the present, Scorponok explains that Zarek had come up with a ghost protocol that would restore his normal brain functions if the Nebulans tried to access his database and then somehow used mind control on the scientists researching his head. Meanwhile, the concern about Thunderwing's body is that it still contains some traces of the creation matrix, and thus the last tangible link to Primus, especially since the last Autobot has now become the first casualty. Hot Rod reluctantly orders the hull vaporized to keep it out of Soundwave's hands, but he teleports away an instant before the bombs go off. On Earth, the humans unanimously vote for the Transformers to leave once they've cleaned up the bodies, which they agree to despite their offer to help rebuild what's left of humanity. They pour all the bodies in a hole to vaporize them, only for Starscream to awaken and manage to escape right before it hits. Turns out the greatest enemy in this series is bad timing. Grimlock, still feeling guilty about everything, reluctantly agrees to serve Scorponok. Scorponok is delighted, especially when he explains that he's uncovered something in Transformers CNA. CNA is short for either cyber/nano algorithms or cybernucleic acid. Like DNA, the idea is that it's the genetic code for a Transformer. Since they're not organic, it's not quite the same thing, but it's definitely the same idea for it being a unique identifier for a person as a person, containing a Transformer's hard-coded design schematics. Scorponok believes that he has discovered the Warrior gene, which determines whether a Transformer is an Autobot or Decepticon. He's developed a gene key that, in theory, will modify that gene, and thus plans to not only turn Grimlock into a Decepticon, Decepticon, but all of Cybertron. And like with Generation 2, this idea is a bit iffy. Not the robot DNA or whatever, but rather Autobots and Decepticons are hard-coded to being good or evil like that. Especially since, over the course of the franchise, some have switched sides before and had their morality alignment shift as well. Anyway, Starscream returns to the Ark, Galvatron also approaching as we enter issue 87. As if anticipating my critique, Scorponok points out that allegiance is not exactly that binary a choice, but his manipulations will make them more inclined to obey him and be liberated from morality. Meanwhile, Autobot scientists have finally discovered the tunnels under Cybertron that led to the Primus chamber, a fact that Hot Rod hopes will lead them to some connection to Primus now that they believe the Matrix is completely gone. Grimlock returns, and Hot Rod wisely shoves him in a cell when he reveals that he can transform again and intends to do the same for the other Dinobots. He can tell something is wrong. Then again, the fact that they're also so easily able to grab him and shove him in a cell should be a sign of things being even worse. Prime elects to remain on Earth as he sends the others away, believing that the last Autobot made a mistake in bringing him back. He's a relic whose time has passed, and he needs to let the next generation, led by Hot Rod, do its thing. After all, that worked out so well in the cartoon! Hot Rod goes into the tunnels, sensing his presence will be needed there. Meanwhile, Perceptor goes in to analyze Grimlock, but gets the gene key applied to him just as Scorponok's other forces arrive and begin executing his plan. And on Earth, Starscream meets up with Galvatron, though lacking the ability to speak from the lobotomy, and leads him into the AI systems of the Ark, discovering Shockwave's body hooked up to the computer. In issue 88, Scorponok returns to Cybertron and meets up with several of the Neo-Decepticons, who don't want to join up because of their allegiance to Soundwave, but he quickly turns them around on it. Soundwave is meeting up with Bludgeon on board the Warworld to show off the resources at his command, an army of drones that he hopes to bring to life with the remnants of the Matrix and Thunderwing. As more Autobots get converted by the gene key, Hot Rod eludes robot creatures found in the depths of Cybertron. I didn't mention them last time, but they came crawling out after the Unicron stuff, and ends up locating a sword. And a golden disc. My god! A laser disc! Think how many Optimus Prime brains you can hold on that thing! Grimlock is brought before Scorponok because he'd been too preoccupied looking for the Dinobots to get them new bodies to help the conversions. He demands Scorponok fulfill his end of the deal, or said deal is off, but Scorponok says Grimlock hasn't fulfilled his part yet. As such, when Grimlock makes it clear that the deal is indeed off, Scorponok disables him and prepares a device to spread the Grand Epiphany, the gene key, all across the planet at once. On Earth, Galvatron realizes that Megatron used Shockwave in his dismantling of Earth's defenses. The Ark's auto-repair systems are nearly complete for its propulsion, and as such, they can actually leave Earth. In issue 89, we see that Grimlock, wasn't disabled at all. He resumes his hunt for the Dinobots, who are currently evading the growing Decepticon forces. In the tunnels, Hot Rod realizes the two objects are the Sword of Primus and the Covenant of Primus, the weapon or the knowledge. A choice he has to make. Unfortunately, Hot Rod goes for a third-party choice that ends up affecting nothing. Grimlock meets with the other Dinobots, who don't really care about his plans or motivations for what he did. His betrayal was too much. Hot Rod selects the Covenant to get some answers, seeing a vision of early Cybertronians, Primus's first effort in creating life, turning on each other. Primus decided to call a do-over, but his attempt at purging the early Cybertronians failed, and many survived in the depths. As such, Hot Rod then selects the sword, seemingly to finish the job. An attack by Scorponok's forces gets the Dinobots to work together again, and they meet up with some of the remaining Autobots to plan their counterattack. Hopefully use the gene key to reset those changed back to the good guys. Although that might be too late, since the team returning from Earth are about to be blasted by the planetary defenses under Scorponok's control, leading us into issue 90. Hot Rod doesn't stab the early Cybertronian, but rather pontificates. This then is the decree and judgment of Primus. No parking on Sundays. You and your kind in this imperfect form must be purged, the slate wiped clean in readiness for a new and better evolution. Not so much extinction as natural selection. Natural selection is a weird way to describe a race of robot people getting exterminated because their god was upset that they got into fights with each other. However, Hot Rod rejects this. He's not Primus, and frankly is disgusted that what they knew of their own history was a lie, based on a mistake that Primus made to kill living beings just because they didn't meet up with his expectations. As far as he's concerned, these beings are just as much Cybertronians as the Autobots and Decepticons, and he'll return when he finds a way to help them. In the meantime, Grimlock and his forces take control of the Civil Defense Hub and secure the data that will hopefully build new bodies for the Dinobots. Most of the Decepticon forces going to Scorponok to watch the Grand Epiphany. Back on Earth, the destruction of the Ark's AI has woken Shockwave, who helps Starscream get his speech and cognitive functions back online. Shockwave doesn't have full control over the Ark, so it's going to need a pilot. Like Starscream. You know, aside from some talk of undermining Shockwave when he was missing, I don't think Starscream has ever betrayed him in this continuity either. Maybe he just found a leader he actually liked.
The Transformers will return after these messages.